Robert, Austin, great to be here today. Great catching up beforehand a little bit. Checked you guys out beforehand, and I really, really am passionate about what you guys are providing, towards the entrepreneurship, towards the, early 20s or early stage entrepreneur crowd. My background has a ton of that. So I'm basically a lifelong entrepreneur. Many points early on, I held a day job and then was building something in off hours. So kind of like that true side hustle where the goal was that the side hustle becomes the main hustle and the main focus long term. So my background is I started kind of side hustling in school and helping some real estate entrepreneurs that were, became mentors, became friends. I was helping them with marketing, right? I had a niche where the real estate industry was a little bit behind on technology. So I entered by saying, hey, let's get you guys up to speed in some areas that maybe you don't understand. Back then it was marketing using the internet, right? So I'm kind of dating myself. Today, maybe that's something like funnels or something a little bit more advanced where many businesses might not have that skill set and need to be brought up to speed. So as I moved into college years, I supported myself by I was actually a DJ for a period of time, and that's kind of paid a lot of my bills as well as marketing and real estate. When I graduated college, my goal was to be around really successful people in the real estate space. So real estate's always been where I wanted to land. So I immediately applied to work for some 2 family offices. And I just said, hey, I got an in. I'm making enough money with my side hustle to go pursue what I really actually wanted to do. It wasn't about the money. It was about the connections at that time. First, it was to learn, and then it was to earn. But what I didn't expect was that I'd get snubbed by both. And they'd both say, I can't afford to hire you for free. So it was a very, very big monkey wrench that threw into the game plan. But I went back to, my skill set. I put together a few things that benefited them very much and bartered basically for a job to work for free. I had an ATM business during the nights to pay for that. That's what paid my bills while I was working for free and, doing 40, 50, 60-hour weeks at the main gig. And then since then, gotten to work with a lot of really good investors, gotten to grow the real estate side, sold a few companies along the way. So to say that I'm passionate about the entrepreneurship community and starting businesses on the younger side is an understatement. So I'm pumped to hang out with you guys and dive in on some things.
I love that storyline, and it reminds me of Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad, where in the beginning, when Robert and his best friend were young, they were working for free for successful businessman, and in the beginning, they didn't really see the value, but ultimately, like you said, when you're working in a space like that, there's a lot of things that become more valuable than money, especially at a young age, and like you mentioned, the connections are huge. So in terms of that, I mean, were there a lot of mentors you met in the beginning days that really helped kind of push you along into that pathway?
Yeah, and that's the name of the game, right? Especially early 20s or, God willing, even if you're in your like late teens and you can just be around winners. I was blessed that I had a family that had very high expectations for work, not for money, not for income, but I just had to have a job, right? So I started working around 12, 13, doing construction on the summers. Eventually I was like, this sucks, right? Like this is really hard work. Backbreaking, I was doing masonry. I was building walls, 11, 12-hour days. And so I worked for a bank and I got a shot. One of the key things when you're on the younger side in an industry that's a lot older is you stand out like a freaking sore thumb, right? Like it's so obvious because you might be 10, 20, 30 years younger than most of your peers. So I got a job in banking because I was like, well, how do I get out of the freaking, 100-degree weather in Southern California and get in an office that has air conditioning where I could learn about money, where I could learn about, business at a higher level. So it was a smaller bank. And the CEO, like I saw the guy walk around and he's like, whoa, like this is a young person that stands out very much in banking, right? A very much older industry. And so I ended up doing some PowerPoint decks and some things for him. Just kind of, he was throwing me a bone. I think I stuck out and he wanted to, give me a shot, and he's still a friend to this day. Right. So when you're young, you have access also. You can go up and talk to people, and there's an assumption of, hey, I have no pretense. I'm not trying to do anything negative. All I want to do is connect with successful people, and people will take your calls. So if you're in that phase and it's trying to get to people that are more successful than you, which I was so broke in my early 20s that everyone was more successful than me, right? But people that I wanted to be like and have a life like, you can basically call them up and they'll take your call, right? More times than not. Hey, I'm just a young kid, I'm a student, and I just wanted to talk blah 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 and ask you a few questions about my career. Like, I would take that call today, and I did that. I was listening to podcasts and hearing people that I wanted to be like, and going on LinkedIn and finding them and finding numbers and finding whatever and calling those people. So that's how I connected with a lot of mentors. I got to tell you, is just reaching out, and they're like, who the hell's this kid that keeps calling me? Right. And then it's like, eventually they take the call, they call you back, and they're like, hey kid, what questions do you got? Cause you called me 5 times, So I was very proactive with mentors that I wanted to be around before I applied, before I tried to get to these family offices that I learned so insanely much more than they could have ever paid me. I targeted them. I searched for them. Small, multi-generational, very, sophisticated. And I wanted small so I had access to the CEO. So when you're young, mentorship access is so much more than any other time in your life. So I can't encourage people, young, early mid 20s to take advantage of that, because all you have to do is call and say, hey, I'm a student and I have a few questions, and they'll take your call just based on that of like, I'll throw the next generation a bone. So I have about 3 mentors that started off as mentors. We became closer. We became friends. We ended up doing a ton of deals together. And still to this day, they're some of our biggest investors consistently. We're at family parties. I'm invited to their daughters' weddings, things like that are like very touching, right? Lifelong friends. Sadly, I've been with some of them while they passed away, right? But these are things that are lifelong connections. And then so you get a little bit older and your job is to start giving back, right? Giving the next generation whatever you've learned, giving the next generation access to things that to information and education that they wouldn't have. So I'm still in the middle. I'm somewhere in the middle of that phase, but I'm still very close with my mentors, and I cannot stress enough how much access you have when you're younger and how to take advantage of it and how important it is.
A lot of people, I think, need to hear that because, we're just kind of past that college age, and we're around a lot of people our age obviously at that time. And, with social media and all the different points of access now, everything that you just said, there's just a lot more weight to that, and you're able to really try to reach out. Now, obviously today there's, spam emails and things like that we kind of have to get around. But was there anything that you can also say that pushed you to make these phone calls? Was there anybody, was it parents that kind of helped you be that conversational person at that young age? Because now, today we really like to push, it just takes practice. Have these conversations. This is another reason why we're doing this podcast. It's helped us so much with just being a better communicator in certain situations like that. So was there anything that you recall that really helped you get to that next point? I'm sure there was a lot of no's that you had to get through and things like that. Can you recall any of those moments?
Totally. So I'll give you my 2 biggest lessons, and I'll tell you how I applied those. The first is clarity of intent, knowing exactly what you're actually going for, right? Like being extremely crystal clear on what you're trying to achieve, because a lot of these, individuals are so busy, right? They have so much on their plate. They're juggling so many different things that you have to be clear with what your questions are, what your intentions are, what you can do. So clarity of intent, right? Is just, you can find who you want to connect with, whether that's in the tech startup space, whether that's in finance, real estate, whatever, government, even, whatever it is, politics, you can connect with these people. They are more accessible than you think, as long as you're very clear on who you want to connect with and why. That's the first. And then the second is a degree of like freedom from outcome, like not taking it personally that they're really busy. So And again, clarity of intent. Calling them multiple times is okay. As long as when you get on the phone or you do get a hold of them, you're like, you're not like, hey, you didn't call me back. Like you don't have any, it's just, hey, I'm really excited to talk to you. I reached out to you for these reasons. I'm a young person. I'm just trying to be successful. You're someone I really look up to. Like if you're just shoot straight with them, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? If you've thought through those questions, if you're prepared and you're on it, that person can't wait to give back in whatever way that they can. Might not call you back the first 5 times, okay? Not saying that they're not busy, because if they're successful, they are. But it's that ability to give the next generation back, in big ways. So if you're super targeted on what you're trying to do and you don't take anything personally, the third, and I'll kind of give you a bonus, if you can make them money, you 100% of the time will have their attention, right? So when I reached out to family offices, there's 2 in particular. Some of the people I respect most in this world are these 2 men, but they wouldn't give me the time of day because I didn't have the status enough to get their attention. So making them money was the only way to do that. And once I did, they're like, oh, this guy wants to hustle. He's willing to put in extra hours. He's willing to go to all the lengths to do this. And from there, it's really hard to say no to money that's being handed your way or deals that you can transition and make money off of. So if you know exactly what you want, who you want to talk to, you don't take it personally along the way and understand that they're not going to probably get in touch with you the first time. And as a bonus, if there's a way that you can make them money or add a ton of value to them, whether it's go through their website, hey, if you do this better, you improve this, or here's a deal that I was looking at, I wanted to pass it to you, no expectations, just a conversation, buy them a box of, I don't know, or whiskey or something like that they're into. Things like that, adding value without being asked, with giving first without getting, those are all big things. You can get basically anybody on the phone.
Yeah, it comes down to relationships. And that's what I've found as I've kind of transferred into a sales role in addition to working on gas money, is if you can build positive relationships, it'll not only, help you with your business side of that person, but let you get to know them more. They'll be more respectful for you. And like you said, you've got some lifelong mentors and friends that you go to their family gatherings because you are willing to put in the work in those early days. So that's extremely inspiring. I think that's some great advice as well for young adults who are looking to grow. My next question is, when you were in this, you were grinding, you were working hard, getting as much advice as you could, and essentially being a sponge, just taking in everything, learning everything. What was that turning point where you got the confidence to say, okay, I'm ready to go start my business now?
So I'll give you kind of both. Is the first is necessity, is like, necessity breeds, what is it? Necessity breeds invention, right? It's just, if you're starving, you seem to just figure things out more, right? You just kind of work more efficiently. When you're in your early 20s or you're in an early stage business, it's often a race to revenue. You need to start getting money in. Oftentimes that's marketing and sales first, right? Just getting transactions under your belt, getting money coming in. So I would say that part of it was necessity. I needed a business that I understood to some degree, that I could tap into, and that would bring me money like as a pretty quick cash conversion cycle, right? Real estate's longer term. I didn't have time for deals, just to be honest. I had time for their deals. I had time to prop up. Once I was working for a family office, I had time to give them, right? But I wasn't making money on those. I needed something on the side. So I started an ATM business because the money was very quick. Right? I knew if I put in X amount of dollars, my ROI was very high. If I did it right, it would be 100% in a year, right? I don't know if those opportunities still exist today, but that industry existed at the time. I was in banking. I understood basics of how ATMs worked, basics of interchange, and all the different things that went into that. So I leaned into that, something that was an easy bolt on that I could work at that point. So I'd say race to revenue is first. And then once you have basic income set up, is thinking longer term, thinking about more net worth, thinking about the big rungs in the ladder to be climbing up. Along the way, necessarily, once you reach different levels of success or once you pass different mile markers, there's the question that I get from a lot of, I talk to, whether it's young family or, some young friends of friends or whatever that have questions. There's the thing that I keep getting asked lately is imposter syndrome. What'd you think about imposter syndrome? Like, did you ever have imposter syndrome? And like the first answer I have is like, I didn't have time for imposters. Like, just to be honest, it was just, there was expectations. I had shots at things that if I didn't take them then, they would be gone. So it was just poor time, poor effort, try my best, hustle, basically not try my best, but just make positive it got done, you know? But now that I've zoomed out a little bit, I'm like, did I ever feel like I was out of my depth? Did I ever feel like I was too far along for what I deserve? Like different ways of saying imposter syndrome. And thinking that through in hindsight, I'm like, yeah, of course, right? That's part of the process. But imposter syndrome, I think, is when people, they're so far outside of their comfort zone. What they do is they say, I shouldn't be here, right? That's like the second half is I feel really uncomfortable because I'm so far out of my comfort zone, comma, so I shouldn't be here, right? And I was looking back and I'm like, I'm thinking about this and I'm like, I think just the math is wrong in some people's heads on this. I think you have to feel that way. Like that is part of the process. That's necessarily a step to take, right? So if you're in your tiny little pond and you're a tiny little fish, it's really comfortable, but then you go a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. Now you're in the deep end and now there's these really big sharks, right? And you feel really uncomfortable, but you should, because you swim harder, you work harder, and then you're a bigger fish, and then you go deeper and you're out of your depth again. And if you keep doing that, especially if you're in your early 20s and you're doing that, the skill sets that you build by necessity, because you have to earn your way into the deeper parts of in the ocean, right? And as you keep doing that, you wake up and you're with your peers, right? Like that's the goal, is that you deserve to be there and you should be at the table and you've earned your chops, right? So I think that's kind of part of the answer, is that imposter syndrome is part of that process. And as long as you're leaning into that and you're saying, look, I feel way out of my depth, but I'm willing to work as hard as I need to, build whatever skills I have to, and perform however I have to, and step up to the plate along the way, that you will perform the way you need to.
That is a huge thing, that imposter syndrome, like you were saying. I mean, when everything's kind of, you're it's going your way, you got some momentum going. If you take a second and you think about that, it's really difficult to really ride that momentum. Otherwise, you're gonna think, oh, is this the right decision to keep this momentum going? Or you can focus, like you were saying, and focus on what needs to be done and what needs to be prepared and what I need to get done to make that next step. And then you just don't have time to ever think that other way. You only have forward. So after the ATM business, what was that next step for you when maybe it didn't look like at that time how you're going to get there, but you knew for some reason that you were? What was that kind of next stepping stone after the ATM business?
Yeah, I think you learn a lot along the way, and that's the goal, is that once you've plugged along and you've reached a certain place, right, where you're making good money or you have a good stable position, you understand the market that you're in and the market that you're playing in, right? I understood that real estate, again, I got into real estate at just about the worst possible time in history, right? Literally one of the worst times in history, right? That's not platitudes. That's one of the worst times in the wake of the Great Recession, right? So I knew what that was because it was all over the news, right? What I didn't know was where you start bumping into things like glass ceilings of smaller industries, like the ATM industry, right? I realized that the harder I worked, not necessarily the more I'd make. Okay. So that you start to, and the goal with, anything that's entrepreneurial, or the goal with anything that's investing, is that your efforts and your returns are decoupled, right? That it's asymmetric, that at some point you're getting more than you're giving. Usually up front, the expectation is you need to give way more than you're getting, right? To kind of get that lift off. So on my side, I realized that the businesses I was in and the kind of side hustles that I had, the harder I worked, I was not necessarily going to get higher up the ladder. So I needed to think bigger and understand really, what is it, TAM, total addressable market, right? Total addressable market of the ATM industry, or total addressable market of other businesses that I was in at that time, were not big enough. And there were ceilings, and there were not trends that I liked to see. So instead, I said, I'm doing too many different things. And if I focus on any of them, I'll do better at that one thing. But is it big enough? And is there a ceiling to it? So what I did was basically evaluated all my efforts. And I said, I'm doing too many things. I want to sell what I'm not doing well at or what has whatever issues. And I want to focus all in on the biggest opportunity, whatever doesn't have a ceiling. So that was a big turning point, right? For me, it was real estate. I always wanted to get there. I always wanted to be on the investment side of real estate, but I never really had the cash. I didn't really have, the team or the chops at that time until that moment. So once I sold the ATM business, I got rid of everything on the smaller businesses and the side hustle side. It was all in on real estate. I also understood the market because I was in it every day. And I understood that while I got in the worst freaking market of all time and where everyone was holding on for deal right, the market had kind of clicked up to a place where I could actually go full time. And there were enough opportunities. But the difference was real estate had no ceiling to me, right? So I said, I could make $1 billion. We could have hundreds of $1 million under management. We could make all kinds of people money. All these great people that I've been building a Rolodex of and meeting at all these events and spending all this time trying to connect with and be around could either be our investors and I could work with them and make them money, or I could have long-term relationships with because I'll be in an industry at the level that they're used to experiencing. So that was it, was analyzing the fact that the total addressable market of my efforts was not big enough. I needed to necessarily go bigger into something that didn't have a ceiling. That was real estate, right? So now looking back, at the time, it was such like, oh man, I don't know. And like, like my heart's torn and like, do I do this or do I do that? Now looking back, it's so obvious, right? But because it's a different lens. So I would suggest to people, again, like that clarity of intent, know where you want to get to. I have really big goals. I want really big things for myself, for my kids, for their kids, an impact to make on the world. The only way that I could do that is by going with something that does not have a ceiling, that I won't run into some degree of a glass ceiling somewhere down the line, because I don't want to work a level 100 like I did for all of my 20s. I don't want to do that forever. I don't want to work 80-hour weeks my whole life. You know what I mean? I'm willing to do it, but not forever. So I don't want a ceiling there that down the line, all that effort that I built in the front, hopefully can pay bigger returns than I put in on a later time, a decade later plus.
I feel like with that first business to the ATM business, looking back, it probably seems minuscule compared to where you are right now. But I'm sure there's a lot of lessons that came through that. So when you were making that transfer into real estate, especially amidst a large global recession, one of the largest in centuries, like you mentioned, what was that first step that you took? Obviously, there's a lot of steps you can take, but really towards getting that set up, and kind of what directed you in the right direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it goes back to I was already working with some really successful guys, right? I was on the acquisition side because I was like, oh, I'll help, do operations, or I'll help with asset management. And they're like, I don't need that. I don't need any, I'm trying to keep those people employed. I got to freaking fire some of those people, right? I don't even have money for operations right now. So I said, well, how can I work for you? And it was go make me money, right? So I basically looked for the biggest opportunities, which at that period of time, if you understand the market you're in, you'll understand the biggest leverage points that you can find. If you really understand that market at that time, 2010, 11-ish, there were more deals than anybody could ever do, right? I have a whole spreadsheet on my computer that I look at that if we did every deal that we processed, nearly every deal from that period, that like 2010 window, would have had record ridiculous returns. It would have like 3, 4, 5 decks, these crazy deals that don't exist today, right? But if we would have done all of them, we would have done great. The issue was there were all these deals and there was no money. Nobody knew what was going to happen in the market. The strength of the market was the opportunity, right? The difficult part was the money to finance all of it. Today, it's the reverse. Today, well, until recently, there was more money than there were deals, right? There was no deals. The market was very dry. You had to work very hard. I came into acquisitions because I wanted to add value. And the only way that I could add value to the people that I was around was to bring them deals consistently, right? So we built out that side. I built out that side, and I leaned into that from to try and build out a system around that. So the next step, which was your question, was putting deals in front of these guys and getting a lot of no's. No, I don't like that deal. Okay, no problem. I'm not entitled to your money, right? But I do know that you have money and you do want deals, and no one else in this market has money. So there's a huge opportunity for both of us. So how can I improve what you're looking for? It's not about me. It's about who I'm going to, right? I'm trying to bring them opportunity. And we fine-tuned, and eventually we started doing deals because I found what they're looking for. Hey, I don't like this asset class. I do like this asset class. That deal's too small. That deal's too big. I don't like that market. I like this market instead. And eventually we found sweet spots of doing deals and getting deals done. And when you build your skill set, this is another like level 10 idea from early 20s. Once you build your skill set, everything piles on top of that, right? Being really good at one thing equals being really good at the next, and having to add things, and they multiply your value, whether it's your business or in the workplace, etc. So the next skill I had to learn was asset management, because I knew I was buying great deals. I was identifying really good deals. I had systems to go track these, whether they were in foreclosure or bankruptcy or directly from the banks or whatever it was. There were off-market opportunities, but then we had too many. And all these projections that I put forward about how good they were going to do weren't coming to fruition because the team wasn't big enough. The systems weren't in place. We had too many deals and not enough bandwidth. So I basically had to roll my sleeves up and build systems around that, right? So now my skill set's improving, and I'm putting that on top of the other. That's when I started Saint. Was, hey, we're already in the asset management space. We know how to do acquisitions. Let's start ramping this up, right? So that was the big shift, was asking the people with money, asking the people that could add a lot of value through their skill set and their money and their investment and their oversight, what they needed, and filling their needs on that side. Also, adding zeros. Okay, I'll just say that going like, you want to talk outside of your depth or feeling like imposter syndrome, when you have a 10, 15, $20 million deal and you're in your early 20s and you're like, this feels way too big, but this guy will do it, and I'll have to work through it with him and support that deal however I can. Those were kind of the big next steps, is stepping up to the plate in a big way and adding value to the guy who needed it.
Yeah. And at that point, how old were you? Were you still early 20s? I
was, the early deals, I was about 23. Okay. So I spent some time, they shoved me at leasing because I was doing a lot of marketing, and I kind of knew how to navigate. I knew how to get leads, right? I knew how to find leads online. Back then it was Craigslist. Again, I don't even know if Craigslist exists anymore, right? But it was Craigslist at the time. And so I was like, oh, I can help you with some leasing. Oh, I can help you with this. How do I make more money? How do I make you more money, right? I'm like, find deals. I'll buy deals right now. So I started underwriting like, 2 to 3 deals a week. I was really bad at it because I never had done it before. And he's just like, no, stupid, no, idiot, no, terrible. And then eventually like, this deal's not bad. Nah, I'm not going to do it. And I said, well, what's good? What's bad? So I even had like a 5-question survey. What do you want to see more of? What do you want to see less of? What do you want, at the end I'd ask. And so early by 23, 24, 25, I had $10 million of cashier's checks in my jacket pocket. And I was going to the courthouse steps bidding against sharks on the on all the foreclosures and things coming down the pipeline. So it was a very interesting time.
Yeah, I can imagine. The reason I asked, and it's crazy, it's actually amazing you were 23, 24 doing these deals, because did you get any pushback from being so young, especially when you're up there with the sharks trying to close out deals? What was your experience in being a young adult doing that?
So this is one of my favorite stories. It's just like when you're with those guys, they're all hustlers. They're just hustlers, right? They're at the steps. Most of them are buying houses. Okay. Or at that time, again, it's been many years since a few years since we bought a foreclosure, but most of them were buying houses. The top guys were buying 10 deals a day, right? They're just banging them out. doing fix and flips, getting it back on the market. And I was very young compared to many of the guys there. I was still wearing my construction work boots, to give you an idea. That's how broke I was. And so they thought I was just some, you know, kind of idiot kid, didn't know what was going on. But I had underwritten like 200 deals at that point. So I kind of knew my numbers. I kind of knew my way around. I kind of knew all the different markets, and I really had spent the time on it. So the number one guy, and I knew him, but he didn't know me. I was nobody at that time. He walks up and he stuck his finger in my chest and he's like, "Who the hell are you?" Right. And I was like, "Oh, I'm just looking at deals, just a guy looking at deals, you know." And he's like, "I don't know who the hell you are. Any deal that you bid on today, I'm going to bid on. I'll overpay just to make you starve to death. I will make positive that you never get a deal done." And I was like, "Oh, gee whiz. Haha. Uh-oh, I'm in the deep end. Lots of sharks over here." What ended up happening was he was bidding on houses and I bid on like an $8 million property. So he was just like, "What?" You know, like so he wasn't even bidding on it. I think I was the only person that showed up for that deal that day. So this guy was like, you know, middle finger in my face by the end of that day. And it just felt good. I've always had kind of a chip on my shoulder. Like I'm willing to kind of, you know, step out a little bit more. And he really wanted to ruin my day. He really wanted to ruin my career. Right. And I still remember his name. And actually the guy donates like at that time he was donating like $5 million a year to his church. So he's actually not a horrible guy outside of the workplace, but he wanted to eat my lunch in front of me. Right. And so that was the mentality of people at that time buying foreclosures and investing. Is it was beyond cutthroat. It was personal and malicious. People wanted you to fail. And so when I, you know, bought a huge deal with a lot more zeros than anything he was buying, this guy was like insulted, you know, that I did this. And so I just said, "Hey, when I come back, I hope you bid on the same deal, like the same deal as me next time, right? Maybe you'll step up," right? And I just kind of was being a jerk back to him, but it felt good, right? It felt good to kind of, but that was the mentality at the time. It was very cutthroat. It was very, you know, a lot of wolves in there.
I'm sure that was a huge confidence boost that went well for you. And it, you know, just after that, so was that between starting Saint and working at this other place, it sounds like, or were you already doing the Saint investment group?
This was very early on. This was before Saint.
Okay. Yeah.
This was before Saint. This was me working for a private investor for the family office. So okay. You know, I went and told my boss at the time, and he laughed his butt off. He was just like, "Oh, good luck next time. You'll see him again. He's there every day. So tell him you said hi next time. Make sure you say hi first." Right. Yeah. To kind of throw a fastball at him. So, you know, my boss was a hustler too. He understood, you know, the hard work and he came from like old world real estate where everybody was, you know, these just really tough personalities.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, so, you know, walking through that, it already sounds like you've learned already so much. So you're, like you said, 200 deals in, you know, kick this guy's ass on that one. And then I'm sure you saw him plenty of times in the future. You know, walk me through getting into Saint and either, you know, the initial ideas, like I'm ready to kind of go out on my own on this. What I'm sure that was a interesting feeling. It sounds like you did all the homework that needed to be done in the preparation to be able to jump right in, but I'm sure there were, you know, some hurdles that you still had to jump over. But how'd you kind of get through that and out of, you know, working for somebody and starting your own thing?
That's a great question. So really the beauty lied in the structure. I wasn't a full-time employee. I was making just enough to pay my bills. So I was doing leasing at that time. That's kind of what paid the bills. And the big pops of income that I had were by doing deals, right? So eventually what happened was I said, "Hey, I've added a lot of value. I've done a lot of deals for you. I'm kind of actually now helping with asset management. I'm not really getting paid a lot for that. Let's do deals together. Like if I bring you deals, instead of me just being a hired gun and kind of getting, you know, a nice little bump, right, and a chunk of cash, why don't you cut me in as a partner? And I'll do all the acquisitions and I'll even do the asset management on it, right? So you're more of like just a smaller capital partner. smaller scope of work, just a capital partner, right? So it was like less, elbow grease on their side. It was me managing more, me with sleeves much more rolled up. And that was very attractive, right? That was very attractive to, to my boss at that time. And so we did that and we started doing deals that way. So I got into syndication in a way that really was catered to where my source of capital was at that time. And eventually had more and more properties under, the Saint banner. Eventually we added more and more deals where we became the asset management partner. We were brought in, literally didn't acquire the property. They were on the acquisition side. We didn't finance the property. We weren't the capital raisers, but we were brought in as the asset management partner. Right. So it was just kind of like, you work with somebody and you add value and they go like, look, if I can make my life easier, if they say I can make my life easier and just bring these guys in as a minority partner on deals and they really kind of do all the work once the deal's bought, that's a good deal for someone trying to scale their portfolio. So that's really what Saint did at scale early on, right? Eventually we hit a point where, we had 9 figures under management, right? Things had really grown. We had built out the team a little bit. We had some really, amazing, high performing team members. And then we started doing our own deals, right? And at some point, your investors or your partners or whatever, there's times where if it's a deal by deal basis, not everything's going to be a fit for them, even if it's a very good opportunity, right? So we kind of took that next step. And a lot of our investors at the time, we had slowly grown. We built our investor base, made more connections and people, and they were looking for something different. And what they really were wanting was fixed income, right? The market had went through kind of more of an almost full cycle. And they said, look, our net worth's fine. Look, we got enough deals. We got enough things that are growing and appreciating over time. What we really need is some fixed income, ideally from real estate, right? So that was our big transition where we started our first full fund. That was the Saint Income and Growth Fund, where we started buying mortgages. We had done mortgage deals in the past. They're a very amazing fixed income investing strategy that we've been doing for years. And we basically pooled those into a fund and paid out set returns to our investors. So that's where now we had done syndication deals where we had really strong returns. We had, our average of our last 7 exits is 35.5%. Very, very, very competitive in the real estate space. So now we wanted to build out our fixed income side, right? We wanted to beat the market a little bit. We wanted it real estate back so that it's away from the stock market. So that was really the next evolution, Austin, was to add in, we had a growth component to our portfolio. We wanted to add in kind of like the second product, if you will, which was fixed income, still backed by real estate, slightly different assets, but still in the real estate world. And that's really what we've been focusing on since and allowed us to grow quite a bit.
So you kind of branch off and, you're getting these partners all from those original connections and people that you were, really giving your all for. And that then helped you to get that knowledge and education to then be able to kind of transition into helping them out, but also helping yourself out in the long run. So what was it like getting your first team together? Where did you look for that? Was it, just your recruiting approach on that? Because it seemed like you had a lot of the knowledge and education, but I'm sure there were other, hustlers and it seems like your team was probably very motivated, like yourself.
While we were building out a piece of the business, kind of in the midterm, our team hit probably 40 people. So, and before that, I was doing hiring for a startup in LA when I was in college. So I was always, that's why I'm like, startup tech world, I love it. I did that in college. I spent a lot of time around there. So I was very comfortable with hiring. Unfortunately, when you got a fire, I was very comfortable with that. I was very comfortable with kind of team management, maybe not as like a top tier 1%, culture builder or team builder, but good enough to get by, where at different points we had teams of 40 something people that I was managing. So I had built those skills just by necessity. I don't want to say like I just, I like figured it out and here's like the super duper strategy. It was just learning on the fly and being committed to the growth of whatever the business needed. And kind of the mindset of that was, I'll work the hardest. I will trade all of my 20s, which is basically what I did. All I did was, go on dates once in a while and work nonstop, right? 80-hour weeks, 90-hour weeks, 100-hour weeks, and work the day shift and work the night shift. So by the time, Saint really started growing, and now I was hiring for our team instead of someone else's team or instead of for a different business, it was a lot easier. I knew what I was looking for. I knew the personality types for each thing a little bit better. We learn every day and we improve our systems, and that's what it takes. But what we're looking for now, kind of being on the backside of a lot of that stuff, is we're looking for people that when we hire on, that the management is like KPI management. We're managing their performance. We're not teaching them roles, right? That's a lot different of a mentality. Earlier on, when you can't afford, really the right team, and you can't afford B plus A level players, what you end up dealing with is people that you have to teach them the role. So you as the entrepreneur, you have to know their job better than they do, right? Like that's really hard to have an entire team where you're like, you kind of have a better skill set or you kind of have more experience than they do. Once you evolve, like at this point in Saint, I want to be like the worst at their job. I want them to be like all-stars at what they're being hired for. And so I'm proud to say like that's where we're at today. But the process, Austin, to answer your question, is like, it goes back to a degree of understanding marketing and branding your company, right? So at this stage, when we hire for a role early on, it was like, I don't know, this person seems okay. Like, I don't know, we can afford them. Like, it should be good enough. It's just a Band-Aid. Now it's like, we're shooting for over 2,000 applicants per role, right? Like that's a different mentality. One of the things that I learned through the process of, hiring for a startup and other things along the way was that the amount of effort that really separates the killers, the absolute A-plussers from like just the averages, it's so much more effort. But if you systemize it and you lean into the process and it's just kind of like, that's the way it is, then your end result is also exponentially better. So our hiring process today, just to kind of skip to like what I've learned and where we're at today, we're shooting for 2,000 applicants per role at this point. We're shooting for people that are, maybe a little bit more expensive than average, but their output is going to be way more than average, right? We're looking for people that we can just walk through our KPIs. Like, we have 10 pages of KPIs. It's Monday as we're filming this. I go through them with our entire team every Monday. I want to walk through somebody that we're potentially hiring and be like, what am I missing? Oh, that's too high. That's too low. This is this. This is this. This is how you improve this. Hey, this metric has been really sticky and it hasn't been performing. What would you do? Right? These are real life examples. This isn't like me setting up a theoretical, hypothetical situation. If I'm not learning from them to a degree in the interview, then I know that they're not good for the role because I'm going to end up teaching them their job. Right? So if you get 2,000 interviews, just to kind of quantify this if you have 2,000 applicants, most of them are going to be crap immediately, right? They just don't have the experience. They're not qualified, whatever. Out of 2,000, you might end up with maybe 100 that are any degree of real quality, right? 5%, right? So 100. Then you sort through, whoever's in charge of that on your team sorts through. You might end up with really like 20 or so that are really like, this is going to be a tough decision. This is 20 really good people. And then you go through 2-3 rounds of interviews with 20 people. Usually it dwindles down to like 2 or 3, right? And you kind of know, right? Usually it's like 3 people and 2 of them are still fantastic, but it's like not the exact skill set you're looking for. And 1 is just a standout out of 2,000, right?
Yeah, that's
kind of where we're at today, from where we're just like, oh, we can't afford it. Let's just get somebody in the chair,
Right. Yeah, one thing I like that you mentioned too, especially in the beginning, is systemization. And it seems like that's something you've perfected over the years. And just kind of jumping into the newer age we're in, obviously you've seen quite a bit of the transformation in the real estate market. Like, how has automation and even artificial intelligence impacted real estate as a whole?
It's a lot. And it's simultaneously more than you can ever imagine, and simultaneously like has so far to go, right? I would say that leaning into the tech side of real estate, financial modeling has just become so impressive, right? And people have been modeling forever, and it's part of the business, but financial modeling at a high level is so much more advanced. Kind of in the same realm, as AI, but you look at like Zapier. Once you start really drilling down with Zapier at a high level and you have things talking to each other, the amount of splicing and dicing of data that we're doing on a regular basis is so granular. It's so granular. So AI in real estate, it gets complicated because like there's the line of like what's algorithmic and what's actually artificial intelligence, right? That line can be a little bit blurred, especially with how companies market and brand themselves. Like you guys have seen this AI dumbbells, right? Oh, artificial intelligence. It's like, no, it just counts your reps for you. That's not the same thing as artificial intelligence, right? So how we're applying it on our side is really it's different projections. You might want to call it like some variation of like a Monte Carlo prediction. That's kind of like a finance term. Like, you know, a lot of like financial planners will do that and stuff. We don't do it to that degree with like 8,000 projections, but we do different degrees of like, if this goes this way in the market, we see this as a projection, and do kind of like, you know, maybe a dozen or so projections with kind of our highs and lows in different areas. So a lot of advanced, I'd say we use more financial modeling that's very advanced. I think our financial modeling and like our financial modeler is a gangster. Like the guy's amazing, right? And then our systems and automations are ridiculous, right? I'm still holding out for real estate to really, really, really be advanced on the AI side. But the side that we use AI the most is honestly, it's not on deal processing and it's not on underwriting. What we use AI the most for is audiences, right? So on our side, we can only work with accredited investors. So in the United States, there's roughly 22 million accredited investors. So I know that our total addressable market that we can work with for our investment fund is 22 million investors. Now, immediately, you're never going to be able to get to all of them. Sometimes people will drop below or above accredited. There's going to be a degree of turnover. But once you start splicing audiences at a high level to really find targeted people that are very likely to invest or very likely to be interested, that's where AI gets very interesting for us today. And those tools have advanced enough that it's worth our effort building those in. For financial modeling of markets, it's still not there. We do a lot of industrial. We do a lot of mortgages. Mortgages are starting to have some AI tools that are very interesting for, you know, market conditions and stress testing of your deals. But industrial, it's like, you know, what do you do for industrial? Like, are you modeling like what happens if the Chinese government's overthrown? What happens if like manufacturing in China, you know, it's the complexity that goes beyond what AI can process today for a lot of that side. But as far as like marketing and automation and systems and database and data management and mining at a high level, that's what we're using AI for right now.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll see where it goes. Yeah. I'm sure you are too. We're all curious, you know, where it can really go because of how fast it seems like it's come out, you know, swinging, but I'm sure we could stay on that topic for a while. I know we're getting close to our time, but I want to hear your breakdown of the wealth transfer. I know that's one of the things you kind of, you know, sent out to us to talk about a little bit, but I was looking in it today, and our buddy, he just graduated out of Western Michigan University. He's going into finance, and that's all he talks about, it seems like. And I guess help us kind of break that down in our heads, because it's just an astronomical amount of money that's going to be handed down in the next, you know, probably until whatever 2045 or something like that. But it's going to be a very quick transition. What is that going to do? Is there, I mean, kind of a loaded question, but are there, you know, different strategies and preparations you guys are putting into place now? And what is that going to look like in the next, you know, 10, 20 years with the economy? Because it's a lot going on.
So, and those are the big questions, right? Those are the big questions that we're asking today. There's no crystal ball in investing, but the closest thing that we've found to a crystal ball that kind of can help you see what is highly likely in the future is really understanding economics, really understanding economic trends. So, Austin, what you said about the greatest wealth transfer in history that's happening in front of us is, just to define it. So we have, you know, multi-generations in the US, right? The biggest generation we've ever had in the US, and also the most wealthy, is the baby boomer generation, right? So the baby boomer generation, after their parents came back from World War II, and it was a brutal war, and the entire world was devastated. In most other places, the U.S., other than, Pearl Harbor and some, economic stresses, the U.S. was kind of largely untouched. So that generation came back from World War II and just had a ton of kids. They flourished. The U.S. was kind of top of the totem pole and really the world leader as Europe was decimated, Russia was decimated, big economies were decimated. So they had a ton of kids. That generation stepped into the U.S. being the world leader economically, geopolitically, militarily, and crushed it. That's the baby boomer generation. So cost of living was low, right? The U.S. dollar was very strong, right? The biggest assets that most humans, most Americans have in their lifetime is their home. Homes were extremely affordable. Education like college was extremely affordable. So it was just a different time to come of age, right? So you look at the baby boomer generation, they also had the hard work. They also had the mentality. They had the grit that their parents' generation that survived World War II passed down to them. So they had this perfect storm of the ability to absolutely crush it on the world stage. And the U.S. killed it, right? So that's, in the 50s-ish all the way till today, the baby boomers are still kind of like the most wealthy generation and the largest. There's a transition happening. Baby boomers are now somewhere between early 60s to almost 80 years old, right? They are past the middle age of retirement. So more are retired than are not retired, right? And they've changed their preferences of their money also. So when you're getting ready to retire, something interesting happens. You're at the period of time where you are making the most money, your highest income that you'll ever make in your lifetime. And while you're also making the highest money you've ever made, your highest income, your biggest expenses are not on the table anymore. Your kids have left the house. So the baby boomers pre-retirement were making the most money they've ever made and had the lowest expenses that they've ever had. So their wealth freaking blew up, right? They had this huge, huge gain in wealth. During that time, we had some inflationary pressures. So their home prices went up. During that time, they still were poised very well in the stock market and in other asset classes. And then COVID happened, and it really tipped the baby boomers in a position where they started retiring more quickly than would have been expected or projected, right? So their trends of their money also happened and took off the table. So now if you look at the baby boomers today, the net worth of that generation today is roughly 68 trillion on the low end. On the high end, that's about 75 trillion that we're seeing. So over the next 20 years, where sadly the baby boomers will slowly start passing away or handing this money down, we're looking at 68 to 75 trillion dollars going into the U.S. economy. Now, to give you an idea what that looks like in comparison to the U.S. entire economy, the GDP for the U.S. is about 24 trillion a year. So we're looking at 3x the economy per year. We're looking at that coming into the market and completely changing. So where's that money going? It's going from the baby boomers. Sadly, they're passing away. They're passing that down to the younger generations, partially Gen X, which is right below the baby boomers. That's a smaller generation. And more so to the millennials, a larger generation, right? So gigantic baby boomers, biggest generation we've ever had till that point. Now passing that to the millennials, an even bigger generation, primarily, mostly going to the millennials. So then the question is, where does all this money go? Right? It's going to Gen X, but mostly millennials. So what do millennials value? Where are they spending that money? Where's all this money going to go in the US market? We're a consumer country, right? That's what drives our economy is consumerism and buying and spending that. It's not like China that's a manufacturing driven economy. So sentiment's very high. Where people value things in the US is where they spend their money. Millennials are actually not as interested in the stock market, for instance, as the baby boomers, right? So we're seeing estimates where the stock market value or interest in the stock market or dollar value adjusted for inflation could drop 10, 20, 40% on the high end for some of these estimates. Whereas the millennial generation particularly is extremely focused in real estate. Look at me. I've always been focused in real estate, right? When I came of age, I was focused on real estate, right? the millennial generation is about 3 times more likely to invest in real estate, about 3 times more interested in investing in real estate than their baby boomer parents. So baby boomers roughly, I'm just taking real estate as one example, but baby boomers roughly invest 5 to 10% of their net worth into real estate, very roughly, right? So if you take 70 trillion times 10%, you're looking at 7 trillion entering the real estate market in the US over the next 2 decades, just the real estate market. So tons of opportunities there, tons of redevelopment. It should be a huge boom period for the US with this money being invested in development, new buildings, new investment, new opportunities there. The average, about 60% of households in the US should receive an inheritance. That's massive. The average inheritance of those that receive it is about $300,000. So just imagine where that money goes. A lot of environmental, a lot of good causes. So wanting to go to places that benefit the country, the environment, the world in different ways. And then about 12 trillion of that is going directly to charities and nonprofits. So that's how the next 20 years looks as we see it today and how that's being broken down. So we see a ton of investment into really good causes, a ton of investment into things like, investment into things like real estate, things like commercial real estate that benefit, kind of how we live our daily lives, new buildings, new industrial buildings, new infrastructure to support that. I really actually think the next 10 to 20 years is an absolute boom period for the US in the most positive way possible. No matter what Washington, D.C. does and how bad they can run things at different times there on both sides of the aisle, I do see the next 10 to 20 years being one of the biggest opportunities for our generation, for the next generations, et cetera. That's kind of my take right now.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for breaking that down, because that was a very, very detailed breakdown of all that. And it's, we were talking a little bit before this, but just seeing those numbers, I mean, it's like you said, it's multiple times the GDP a year of the entire country that's going to be coming back into the market. So that's huge. And you mentioned, Washington, in the investment industry, you've obviously went through some elections with your company. You never want to time the market with I'm sure with real estate as well, alongside the stock market. But what kind of different preparations do you take? Because we're actually now getting started in one of our first investment rounds for the startup. So it's a little bit different, but how big of a difference is a year like this year or past elections for your sake?
Sure. I'll just talk about my experience and my research on it, because there were a couple of years where I was real stressed on the outcome of elections, right? I'm still on the younger side, especially for real estate. I'm on the very young side on that spectrum of ages. But here's what I've learned so far, okay? Here's my takeaway so far. The biggest issue with elections, it's not right versus left, it's uncertainty. The market and investors freaking hate the uncertainty that goes with it. Okay, that's one. So what are my takes? My takes are that once we finally have an elected president, right? I'm an independent, so I can, talk smack on both sides pretty confidently. I just try to call balls and strikes. That's kind of like I'm somewhere in the middle. I actually think that the specific president will matter less than people give it credit for. Whether it's, Kamala, Trump, RFK, whoever wins, right? Whoever it is, it's less important. It's more so stability in the marketplace. I think that Kamala is throwing some things out that are very scary to the business community right now. And you're going to hear things like taxes on, getting rid of the 1031 exchange. That would be very, very interesting and complicated for the real estate industry. Wealth taxes on those making 100 million more, or 100 million or more a year, or have a net worth of 100 million, or billionaires, or unrealized capital gains. I've been hearing those for 3 elections. I'll just put it that way. You know what I mean? And then the flip side of it, if I'm just being honest and I'm just being that political independent, right? How often are our politicians completely up front with us, right? Like Kamala raised, as of today, she raised $540 million. Okay. Now, she's not Obama, where Obama had a grassroots movement where people were donating $25 at a time. That is not Kamala. She is a big money capital raiser. Okay. She's arguably, not a super seasoned politician, but she's pretty damn good at raising money. That's what we've seen, right? 540 million. So with all that money, how many of those have financial interests to not have a lot of those laws passed? Does that make sense? So by the time a president's elected on one side or the other, I believe that most of the time they need to play nice with who got them there financially. And I don't see Kamala or Bernie Sanders, multimillionaire, or AOC, multimillionaire. Most of the time when I hear a lot of their stuff, you just look into their background and you're like, I just don't see them snubbing the biggest donors that they have. So my fear is not whether it's Trump or whether it's Kamala. I kind of picked on Kamala. Trump has plenty of things to pick on also, but all that to be said, it's the uncertainty that goes around elections that scare money. It's what if the worst things happen and all that. Even if Trump gets elected and does a bunch of crazy stuff, or Kamala gets elected and tries a bunch of crazy stuff, they still got to get through Congress. Congress is a gridlock at best. So, Robert, Austin, my concern over any one piece of legislation is low because I think all bets are hedged through Congress. And I'm mostly concerned about things like uncertainty in the marketplace by not knowing who's going to be the person sitting in the chair, one. And then two, I really hope the civil and social unrest thing doesn't happen this election cycle, right? Those are things I'm more concerned about. It's not the president, right? I have thoughts on who would be better at different things. I'm an economic voter, okay? I think when the whole country's doing well financially, that a lot of stresses are reduced. Right now, we're not in a good place financially. If you look at the average family, I think it's something like the quick math, and I have this somewhere in different notes kind of around. But since 2020, mortgage payments and mortgage costs have risen by 111%. Okay. So at one point in time, pre-COVID, it was about 45% of American families could afford to buy a house, right? Now that's less than 15%. Okay. Not a good statistic, right? So right versus left, I'm just talking economy. That's not good. Okay. From 2020 till today, 80% of every dollar in the United States has been printed. That's not a good statistic. For 200 years, we printed 20% of dollars. Since 2020, we printed over 80% of every dollar. We're racking up $1 trillion in debt as a country every 90 days, right? Those are things that keep me up at night a lot more than who's president, right? Especially when both sides seem to be bragging about how much money that they can spend and what they're going to give away. So I hope that answers the question. I think we're just looking for stability and just trying to get through this freaking election without billions of dollars of property damage or murders or anything crazy in the country. That's what I'm praying for. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, no, that's a very intelligent analysis of it. And I'm honestly glad we kind of got into this conversation too, because especially young adults nowadays, there's so much noise out there on social media, on the news, not necessarily just around politics, but around any skill you want to go into, whether it's real estate, whether it's entrepreneurship. And really, like you just mentioned with theirs, you just have to look into the facts and make your decision based on education. That's really kind of what growth stems through is knowledge. So I think this is a great point to kind of wrap it all back together. I mean, you've shared your story with us right now. You're doing great with Saint Investments. From what we saw online, it looks like you guys are doing over 200 million with the portfolio right now across 20 different states. So it's extremely inspiring stuff. To wrap it all back around to the young adults, you mentioned discipline is important. You mentioned networking is important, finding mentors, more importantly, getting knowledge. If you had one piece of advice for those young adults out there that are listening right now, what would that be?
I would say that your number one investment in your 20s is going to be education. Absolutely. And I'm not talking about formal education. I'm not saying go to college. I really don't care if you go to college. That's between you and your decisions you make there. But investing, literally putting money behind something to get a bigger gain on the backside. Let's define investing that way. That I've spent, I don't know, probably 7 figures on different degrees of education. I still put huge money towards education, right? Because if you want to be cutting edge, you want your trajectory to be, to the moon, it has to be putting money towards education and proving whatever you're doing at a very high level. So especially in your 20s, especially if you're really committed to the process where you're trading. I traded most of my 20s for success, to be successful financially, to put myself in a better place so that when I had a family and I had things, that I was in a place where I could really enjoy those things in a different way. So all the hours in the world are great, but if you have all the hours that you're putting into that and you're putting your money behind your education, it exponentially grows. So it's like the real world application plus like the high level strategy, plus the high level mindset, plus the so I would say invest in your freaking education in your 20s, and you can start putting money away after that. But once you've ramped up your income, you've ramped up your position, you're in the place you want to go where you got a really bright future ahead on that.
That's huge. That's what we've been trying to do, and we're just going to keep listening to that. So it's been a pleasure to have you on. A wealth of advice and knowledge and everything, Nick. Is there any places, social media, places that people can kind of find you that you want?
Yeah, you can find me on everything. We're all over the place. We put a lot of really great content out, but the number one thing, it's kind of in the same vein as free education, is we give away all the economic research that we do. Right? We give it all away. We spend the time on it already to make sure that our own investments are following our correct trends and have the best strategies. So if we're already doing all the work, we figure we might as well just package it and give it away. All of our economic findings, all of our strategies, everything that we're doing, we give away for free at saintinvestment.com/resources. So we host a bunch of live webinars. We're doing one tomorrow, literally on the greatest wealth transfer of all time. So it's kind of funny that you guys mentioned that. So by the time viewers see this, that will be up on the website. They can go watch the entire breakdown of that. We do one of those every month. We do all kinds of great, live events that we post videos to there, breakdowns, walkthroughs of investment strategies. So saintinvestment.com/resources, and you can find everything that we do for free.
Awesome. I love that. Giving back to the community, and like you said, it's helping people out once you get to the position you're able to, giving back to the previous generations. And I think we did a great job of that today. So appreciate your time so much, Nick. Thank you for hopping on. And like we always say at the end of our podcast, go get that gas money.